We've got here a set of 3 documents which illustrate well the evolution of the values, goals and tactics of the labour movement in the United Kingdom since 1945. The first of these documents is a poster issued by the Labour Party during the 1945 general elections campaign, were won by Clement Attlee. It illustrates the ideas used by the communication of the Labour Party at the beginning of the period. The third document is a video which presents an emblematic struggle of the trade unions in 1972, the first famous struggle of Arthur Scargill.
Seldom before or since has there been a protest like the one called the Battle of Saltley Gate in 1972. Thousands of workers in Birmingham marched on a gas-board coking plant in an incredible act of solidarity to help striking coal miners block the gates. It helped make Arthur Scargill one of the most famous trade union leaders of all time.
We know they're going to do him, they say. No filming. Yeah, you're not filming now, you see. As soon as it's them that gets knocked down, they don't want to film it. We're going to get this all.
It meant to me that everything I dreamed about as a trade unionist crystallised on that day. Working people from different industries saw the need to come to the assistance of those who were battling against odds that were really unfair. Let's, in 2012, understand the need for the Midlands Spring, for the British Spring, and change our society.
It's a document which illustrates well the radicalism of the British trade unions during the 70s. The second document is an extract of Tony Blair's first speech when he became leader of the Labour Party in 1994 and changed its name into New Labour. It shows that the New Labour Party has changed its doctrine. At the beginning of the period, the labour movement is a moderate movement, but a moderate movement which has a radical expression. This is what we see in the first document, the Labour poster of 1945, which shows well that the Labour Party at that moment wants to represent a social class. So this is a pretty radical communication which wants to illustrate the Marxist principle of class struggle. It opposes industry and the people as if the worker were opposed to the bourgeoisie, and it compares work to slavery. So it aims at advocating the class consciousness of the working class. At the same time, they use a pretty aggressive communication. The fists are tight, which is a symbol of an emblematic vocabulary. Of course, they speak about slavery. They express radical refusals. For example, the private monopoly, don't want it at all. And of course, with the symbol of the broken chains, they also develop the image of a fight. On this poster, they also defend a socialist project. This is what is represented by the slogan, for public ownership. This is the reference to the Labour Party Charter, which repeats the Marxist doctrine of public ownership of the means of production. But in fact, at the same time, the Labour government, which was elected in 1945, led by Clement Attlee, had a pragmatic action. Of course, they made some nationalization, but their best achievement is the National Health Service 1946 or the development of council housing. So their priority was more to improve the life of the people than to make a socialist revolution. A few years later, in the 70s, we see that the movement is still torn apart between radicalism and moderation. The 70s are a period of radical strikes. We have, of course, the example of the 1972 strike.
Thousands of workers in Birmingham marched on a gas-board coking plant in an incredible act of solidarity to help striking coal miners block the gates.
In fact, the miners often led radical strikes, and the most radical was the one which happened 7 years after the Winter of Discontent in 1979. This is a period when they used a lot of methods which were very efficient to have radical strike, like strike pickets, like the clothes shop, which made sure that the workers would strike because they were all members of the same trade union, and there were solidarity strikes. Because this event, the Battle of Salt Lake Gate, illustrates well the idea of solidarity between workers. This is what Arthur Cargill says.
Working people from different industries saw the need to come to the assistance of those who were battling against odds that were really unfair.
The idea of solidarity between workers is the echo of the Marxist idea of class struggle. The solidarity between the workers is more important than their links with their boss, because they have common interests. Even the workers which were not concerned directly by the problem which provoked the strikes, even them struck in order to support the miners. So it's an illustration of the solidarity between the workers. But Arthur Cargill became very famous thanks to this strike.
It helped make Arthur Cargill one of the most famous trade union leaders of all time.
We know they're going to do him, they say. No filming. Yeah, you know filming now, you see. As soon as it's them that gets knocked down, they don't want to film it.
He embodies very well the radicalism of the labor movement of the 70s, but in fact he was progressively more and more isolated, because the strike of 1972 was against a conservative government, but the Winter of Discontent 7 years after was against a labor government. In fact, the trade unions won, but the Labour Party lost the elections because of the unpopularity of the trade unions led by Arthur Cargill. And in 1984, the miners' strike, which lasted almost 1 year, which was led by Arthur Cargill, this strike was lost and was really unpopular. So this unpopularity can be considered as a reason why the labor movement was attracted by a moderate trend. And this is what is illustrated by the New Labour in the 90s. So, can we say that New Labour is a socialist movement? Tony Blair speaks about socialism. He says, this is my socialism, and we shouldn't apologizing for using the word. So he wants to use the word socialism, but just after, he shows that he has a very moderate vision of socialism. It is not the socialism of state control. He defends other values like working together, solidarity, cooperation, partnership, values which are very consensual, which don't illustrate at all the class struggle. And there is a very strong opposition between this use of symbolic words and what we can read in the poster of the Labour Party used 50 years before. So in fact, Tony Blair doesn't defend a class against another. That's why he has changed the clause 4 of the Labour Party charter, removing the reference to public ownership, because he doesn't want state control. Tony Blair is so moderate that he doesn't want to disapprove the Tory legacy. He says it in the same speech when he refers to the Tory trade union laws he doesn't want to change. These laws refer to the Trade Union Act, which is a symbol of the struggle of Margaret Thatcher against them in 1984. Tony Blair, when he refers to that, only refers to strike ballots, the necessity for strikers to have secret ballot before the strike. This is only a part of this legislation, and Tony Blair doesn't want to evoke the real limitation of the rights of trade unions. So, if the Labour Party doesn't really oppose to the ideas of the Tories, is it still a socialist movement? Is it still possible to have a socialist ambition in Great Britain? Well, Tony Blair says that he doesn't want a revolution. So, how is it possible to be socialist without a revolution? When we hear Arthur Cargill, visibly a revolution is necessary.
Everything I dreamed about as a trade unionist crystallized on that day. Let's, in 2012, understand the need for the Midland Spring, for the British Spring, and change our society.
Changing the society remains an ambition for some leaders of the labor movement even 20 years after the moment when Tony Blair became the leader of the Labour Party. So, is it possible to conciliate radical dreams with a pragmatic governance in a post-industrial society? The rise of Jeremy Corbyn, who became the leader of Labour Party in 2015, shows that radicalism is still alive in the British labour movement today, and that the contradiction between radicalism and moderation is not over.